and welcome back to another video. Um, so there has been a new ceasefire proposal. President Biden announced this on Friday, and it really kind of came as a surprise. So let's figure out what's going on, what's in the new proposal. Is it likely to go through? Biden's speech was really weird. He said, I support an Israeli proposal. However, nobody had heard anything about the Israeli proposal. So then he went on to his speech where he seemed like he was trying to convince the Israelis to take the deal that he said was their deal. All right, there's a lot of political machinations going on. Let's dive into it and try to make sense of it all. So on the 29th, the Israeli War Cabinet met and they approved this current ceasefire proposal. But Netanyahu was very against it and only agreed under extreme pressure and very reluctantly. And when he did so, he sealed this deal under military censorship so that nobody would know about it. But then Biden came out and announced it to the world. And he totally blindsided Netanyahu. So, basically, the next day, the proposal was sent to Hamas. And Hamas has, since October 8th, been very willing to negotiate. However, they kind of changed their position and they were like, we're done negotiating with these guys until they stop bombing the hell out of Gaza, and then we can talk. And the reason that their tactics have kind of switched here is that they now are in more of a position of strength as world opinion is turning against the Israelis and pressuring them to end this war. So when Biden made his surprise announcement, he said, well, this will be a test for Hamas if they'll really agree. And Hamas kind of almost immediately came out and said, yeah, this looks good to us. And the reason they did that was because this deal, you guys, is almost exactly the same as the deal from a few weeks ago that was also an Israeli deal. And then when they agreed, the Israelis kind of backed out of it. It's pretty much the same thing. And Hamas has been asking for the same basic things since this all began. A permanent ceasefire, withdrawal of the IDF, rebuilding Gaza. And so, yeah, Hamas agreed. And Biden's speech was really trying to convince the Israelis. Now, why did he come out and blindside Netanyahu? Well, there's a few reasons. Biden is getting increasingly frustrated with Netanyahu as time goes on and as public opinion has really turned against him, and he's in an election year, and this is looking really bad for him that he's doing a genocide. He needs this to wrap up. And the reason that he announced it was because the clock is really ticking on the chances of there getting to be any kind of a deal. And the reason for this is because one of the war cabinet members, his name is Benny Gantz, he announced recently that Gaza, there's no plan for the day after. And he was saying, like, you guys need to come up with a plan, and you have till the 8th of June, or I'm leaving the coalition. So that would collapse everything, and most likely the person who replaces him will be one of these far-right religious genocidal nut jobs, at which point there's really no chance of a deal. So the clock is ticking, Biden's feeling the pressure, and he's trying to put that pressure on Netanyahu to get this done. So, it was really deliberately timed by Biden, too. When he made his speech, he did so at the beginning of the Jewish Sabbath. That meant that these guys, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, the really far-right extremists, Their religious beliefs mean that they couldn't really respond during the Sabbath. So that gave it a whole day to get some traction going before they had their inevitable freak out and did their threats and all of that. So, what's in the deal? It's basically a 3-phase deal. It starts with a 6-week ceasefire, during which time Gaza gets flooded with aid. That's critical, of course. There will be a prisoner exchange of the Israeli and Palestinian prisoners and captives. Now, I just wanted to make a side note. We usually hear Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners. And this language is pretty prejudicial, slanted, and inaccurate. In fact, there are hostages and there are prisoners on both sides. We don't hear this often, but a large percentage of these Israeli hostages are actually IDF prisoners of war that were captured on October 7th when Hamas overran the IDF bases that were on the border of Gaza. These guys are not hostages, they're prisoners of war. And then when you hear Palestinian prisoner, it kind of makes you think, well, the Palestinians, they're prisoners, they must have done something wrong. And while some of them are prisoners who have been sentenced in Israeli jails, generally these are people who are in the Palestinian resistance, and they were believing and engaging in armed resistance against their occupiers. That is not a crime. There are rules of war you have to follow, but resistance is not a crime. It is a right under international law. And there's also a lot of these people that in the West Bank since October 7th, the Israelis have just been rounding up thousands of Palestinians and throwing them in prison, torturing them. Many are children. Many committed no crimes whatsoever or just the most minor of infractions. And then there's also a large contingency of people from Gaza that had work permits to work in Israel. And then when October 7th happened, which they had nothing to do with, they were just at work doing construction or working on farms. They were all rounded up by the Israelis and have been in prison for 8 months being tortured for no crimes at all. And of course, even if someone has committed a crime, the Israeli practices of torture are never acceptable. So anyway, back to the deal, right? There was going to be an exchange, and it was going to start with women, children, the sick, the injured, the elderly. And Gazans would be allowed to return, it says, to their homes. What they really mean is their home areas. Nobody has homes anymore. Everything's been flattened. But this has been a real sticking point for the Israelis, who did not want Gazans to return to the north at all. They had visions of beachfront Israeli settler condos and kicking all, ethnically cleansing the Palestinians, at least from that area, if not from all of Gaza. And in previous things, they have said, well, we'll let the women and children return to the north, but no men. Obviously, that is completely unacceptable. You can't just tell half of a family they can't come back because of their gender. So this was actually an Israeli concession. And a good one. That's the right thing to do. Now, the second phase would be to negotiate the terms for a permanent ceasefire. This is where there's still a lot to iron out. There's a lot of sticking points here. This is when they'd be negotiating about the high-value captives, which would be the Israeli military people, the commanders that were captured, and as well as the Palestinian resistant faction prisoners that are currently in Israeli jails. And those are negotiating how many number get released for how many, how many Palestinians for how many Israelis, exactly who gets out. All that would still need to be negotiated. And there's also phase 3. That would be the permanent ceasefire takes place and a reconstruction of Gaza. So Netanyahu has already come out kind of trying to sabotage this deal that he really didn't want to begin with. And he said, well, this is a non-starter. We need to eliminate Hamas. So, okay, you guys, that is impossible. I'm probably going to make a whole video on why that is the case. But just to keep this short, military experts on both sides say that is never going to happen. So basically, saying we got to go eliminate Hamas is a license to keep doing a genocide and have a forever war. So there are a lot of sticking points before anyone would get to a permanent ceasefire. But that is what is currently on the table. And even though once the Sabbath was over, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich predictably came out and had a total cow, threatened to leave the government and collapse it if this deal is agreed to, because they want the war to keep going. They are all in on the genocide and resettling Gaza. Now, there have been a couple of more moderate factions in the Israeli government that have offered Netanyahu, hey, if these guys leave, we'll join your coalition so the government doesn't crash and we can get this war ended. That's awesome. I'm super glad they stepped up. We should clarify when we say more moderate, these people are all, by our standards, quite extreme, but they are not as hardcore. It would be better to get these people in the government. However, Netanyahu himself is very, very conservative, and he's definitely pro-genocide. He's also got the consideration that if he gets into a coalition with people that are more liberal than him, that's going to kind of force him to do other stuff he doesn't want to do, so he's not really happy with that. But that is at least an option. Will he take it? I don't know. In Biden's speech, he really was appealing to the Israeli public and saying, you guys, look what's happening around the world. Israel's losing support. Netanyahu is a nut job. You got to get him out. And if Netanyahu agrees to this, the end of the war means the end of power for him. So he's really hesitant to let go of his power. He's also facing jail for corruption as soon as he's out of power. Not to mention accountability for his responsibility for what happened on October 7th. So, will he agree? Will this public pressure be enough? That remains to be seen. But last night, there were over 100,000 Israelis out in the street demanding an end to the war and a return of their hostages. This is really important pressure. But, the Israeli public and the Israeli government are very, very torn between the people that just want to keep the war going and the people who want to see an end to this and see the writing on the wall that Israel is kind of caving in on itself and they need to end this war for their own survival. So, we can all pray that this works. I think it's important to note that Biden could have put this pressure at any time. And if he doesn't stand behind this ceasefire with his full force, because Netanyahu is going to need tons of pressure to agree, but this war has to end. This genocide has to stop. And will they do the right thing? I guess we'll see. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them down below in the comment section. I will respond to all of you. I wanted to thank everybody so much for watching, for supporting this channel, and things you can do to support the channel and my new endeavor here. Please like, share, subscribe. All of that helps enormously when you are a new YouTube channel. I really appreciate your support. Thank you for watching, and sending you guys all lots of love. Let's hope this works. And free Palestine.